Firefly. That's not correct. Michael will be speaking for Firefly. He is the CFO and a co-founder of Firefly. So I'll now hand it over to our panel moderator, Guillermo Söhnlein. He is the founder of Fortivo Holdings, and he will kick off the panel.
These on? No, they're on. Good. So if you want, Christopher, Natalya, Michael. All right, so while we're getting set up, hopefully everyone's having a good time this week. I'm currently living in Atlanta, but for 3 years I lived here in Seattle. It's one of my favorite cities. It's absolutely beautiful. It's vibrant. It's exciting. And as you've seen already this week, it's got a lot of space companies. So it's really, really special place. So hopefully everyone's enjoying it. And actually, I just realized, Christopher, on the entire slate today, you're the only Seattle company represented today. Woohoo! But so you're the standard bearer. Thanks for being here early this morning. This is usually one of my favorite panels to be involved with. It's a nice bookend panel to the afternoon panel that's going on after lunch. We get to talk with entrepreneurs and talk about their experiences and their exciting young companies. This afternoon you'll learn from the other side of the table, the investors that put money into these entrepreneurs. So a little bit of housekeeping. We're going to try doing this as a very loose and informal discussion among the four of us. You know, I just realized being up on these bar stools, I almost feel like the acoustic set during a concert. Like, you know, we're going to break into an a cappella version of Hotel California or something. But anyway, we're going to do this as a very light, informal discussion. As such, I personally don't believe for these panels to have formal Q&A sessions at the end. I want to involve you in the discussion as we go. So as you've seen, there's 2 microphones sitting there in the hallway there, or in between the seats. As we're talking, if you've got a question, a comment, you want to get involved in the discussion, just make your way to one of the microphones and I'll rope you into the discussion. Don't wait till the end because we're not going to have a Q&A session at the end. Let's see, what other housekeeping? I guess one light housekeeping thing, if you see me looking at my phone, I'm not checking Twitter. This is where I actually have my notes. So I'm just going to say that right now. All right, so first of all, for those of you following along in the program, Andrew already mentioned some of the changes to the program with Michael joining us in place of his colleague PJ, which is actually really good. As you hear his story and his experiences, you'll understand why he's so adding such a valuable dimension to this discussion. Right next to him is Natalya Brikner, and on the other side for me is bookending the panel is Christopher Richins. You can find their bios in the programs, but you'll also kind of get to hear about their backgrounds and their companies as we go through the discussion. All right, so why don't we get started? One of the things I thought we'd start and put you guys on the spot, kind of your mini pitch. If you could just go through and one sentence describe your company.
Good morning, everyone. Firefly Space Systems is an Austin, Texas-based dedicated small satellite launch vehicle developer.
Accion Systems is building electric propulsion for satellites from 2 to 2,000 kilograms. We're Boston-based.
And RBC Signals provides satellite communication infrastructure as a service. We take the cost and complexity out of getting your data from space to the ground, and we're based here in Seattle.
That was 2 sentences, but anyway, we'll let you slide.
It was a comma.
you know, it's funny, flying in on Monday, I was thinking, you know, when we put together this panel, we wanted to try getting a diversity of companies, different stages, doing different things, diversity of entrepreneurial backgrounds and experiences. One thing I noticed we failed on is we ended up with 3 hardware companies, which I guess is not atypical in the space industry. But, you know, no software, no services, but that's okay. At least we've got a variety of different hardware companies. I'm going to try breaking the discussion up a little bit. I want to learn and have them share with you a little bit their entrepreneurial stories. Actually, before I do that, on Tuesday afternoon panel, Esther Dyson asked a question. She tried polling the audience. I'm going to ask a different question than she asked. Show of hands, how many of you are currently working on an entrepreneurial venture, on a startup of your own? Okay, a good number of you. Nice. And out of curiosity, I can't remember if anyone asked this yesterday, how many of you are looking to work at an exciting new space company? All right, cool. All right. There's our audience. So, so as part of this, I wanted to have them walk you through a little bit of their personal stories so you can see how people actually get to the point of doing something crazy like starting a new company and starting it in the space industry. Maybe I'll start a little bit with Natalya, because of the three of you, I think you're kind of the more pure space entrepreneur. You've kind of had a passion for space and you kind of went right into a space startup. Can you give them a little bit of your background?
Sure. So I've been aerospace all the way through school. Did my PhD before becoming full-time at Accion, but before that I was at Duke working on my master's degree in microchemical propulsion, and my advisor convinced me to form a company. So that's not Accion Systems, it was a previous startup, and I had such a horrible experience, and I said, I'm never doing that again, that was terrible. And so I went and kind of hid in academia a bit longer and did the PhD, and we got so much interest in the technology we were working on that the timing's wonderful, as you all know, for working on a new type of propulsion system for small satellites. And my research advisor said, basically here's a second chance at doing what you kind of effed up last time. So like, don't do that again, but take this opportunity and run with it. And here I am. We founded Accion originally in 2012. Didn't really do a whole lot until the end of 2014. We raised a seed round then, closed that the same week I defended my dissertation, and closed the round on Christmas Eve. So I was like a terrible family member that month. And here we are.
Great. Christopher, you took a little bit of a more space circuitous route. How about a little bit of your story?
Sure. So I didn't start thinking that I was going to be in space. In fact, I was 3 semesters from graduating with a business management undergrad degree before the space bug hit me, or bit me. And when it did, I heard about this company, Sea Launch, that was taking Russian and Ukrainian rockets and putting them on ships and taking them out to the equator and launching stuff to space. And it was such a cool thing that I literally called them on the phone and told them that I would do anything to work there. And they said they wanted RF engineers, and even though I couldn't even spell it, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. And not just to work at a company like Sea Launch, but I really wanted to run a multinational space company like that. And so I changed my major that day. And instead of 3 semesters, I took 3.5 years to get the engineering that I needed to be an RF engineer. But then I was very fortunate that 3.5 years later, they still needed RF engineers, and they took me on. And I had 5 wonderful years working at Sea Launch, and just really learned a lot about the industry. I was able to launch rockets and deal with satellite communications, and really caught the bug. The U.S. partner to Sea Launch was Boeing. They were kind enough to pay for a master's degree in astronautics. I just loved learning more about the science of space. But I really kept this dream of wanting to run a multinational space company. And even though Sea Launch isn't around to run today in the same form that it was, I went to business school. I wanted to learn more about how businesses were run, and so coming out of business school, I took a job as a management consultant. I was able to move very quickly from industry to industry and learned a lot of the fundamentals of what makes a business successful. And coming out of that, I was able to do an externship at SpaceX. I was very grateful for that opportunity to see how that space company was run. I was one of the early employees. I think I was employee number 3 at Arcade Astronautics, which became Planetary Resources. I learned a ton about how space businesses run there as well. And it was while I was there and thinking about ways that we could generate revenue along the path to mining asteroids that I realized that there was a big problem in the new space industry. these satellites that are being launched all need to be able to get their data down to the ground. And for us at Planetary Resources, that was going to be a challenge as well. And so as I started to think about how to solve that problem, I realized that having this global infrastructure that was required was going to be very difficult for any space startup to deploy, to be able to get good access to their data. And even if you did deploy that infrastructure, managing would be difficult, and you'd only use a fraction of that available capacity. And so that was the seed of what eventually became RBC Signals. But when I left Planetary Resources, the space industry still wasn't mature enough, I thought, to support that business at that time. As passionate as many of us are about space, you don't get a pass because it's cool. There still has to be a market there. And so despite having this idea, I realized that I needed to incubate it until the market showed signs of life. I was waiting for things like regular, affordable, reliable access to space at a reasonable cost. I was looking for VC money coming into the industry, and I finally found those things in 2015 when I started RBC Signals. But in the meantime, I wanted to continue building skills, and so I went outside of the space industry, used the skills and talents that I had learned in consulting to be able to continue to build the knowledge and experience that I would need to eventually run that multinational space company. I worked at Expedia for a few years, managing international deployments of infrastructure. I worked at a pre-IPO software startup, managing global software teams, and really continued to put together the fundamental building blocks of operating a multinational space company, so that when I was able to see that the future was more clear and that the market was evolving, and that was in almost exactly a year ago in June 2015, I was ready to found the company. I had a multinational team from the very beginning. My co-founders are Russian. My VP of sales is Israeli. And really, it's been a dream for me to finally be at this point where I can have achieved that goal of running that multinational space company. And now the trick is just making sure it's successful.
And Michael, you probably took the most circuitous route to getting on stage with us today. How about a little bit of your background?
Sure. For starters, I'm not an engineer, and most definitely not an aerospace engineer, so my hat goes off to just the academic accomplishments that both of you have in that regard. But my background is in business and finance. I arrived in Silicon Valley in the fall of 1998 at the height of the dot-com bubble with a degree in economics and finance, and spent 7 years in Silicon Valley, a couple stops that were reasonably or not so successful, but ultimately joined PayPal. I was the fifth person on the international team at PayPal. It's still a relatively small company compared to what it would become at that time. My job was to start PayPal in Germany, which was the largest market for eBay outside of the United States. And spent about 3 years with eBay after they acquired our company, ultimately running payments in Southeast Asia and the Pacific. And then in late 2005, my best friend from college, who'd taken a road of working on Wall Street, called me up, and he'd had a pretty successful career as a hedge fund manager behind him, and was planning to start his own hedge fund and was looking for someone to help him build that business. So I moved from technology to the dark side of finance on Wall Street. And we sold that fund actually the following year. I then moved to Asia, where I'm originally from, and started a private equity fund with my brother in a little former Portuguese colony called Macau. We invested in very down and dirty businesses. We brought the first stretch limousines into Macau, things that are cash flowing. I'm a finance guy. And then came back in 2008 to start a company called Hedgeye Risk Management, which is the largest independent financial and economic research company in the United States today. Luck is when preparation meets opportunity. I had been interested in space since my first day in first grade when I watched a space shuttle go up on TV. And in 2014, late 2013, early 2014, right constellation of people met. We had the right idea. We saw a huge market opportunity to build essentially what will become a Falcon 1 or a family of Falcon 1 replacement vehicles. And hence Firefly was started.
Interesting. It's funny that you said you were interested in space since you saw a shuttle flight. Because I know when I started looking at space stuff 13, 14, 15 years ago, everyone who was on the panels would say, oh, I got interested in space when I saw Apollo, right? And now it's this like generational thing that's happening. It's pretty cool. So for you at Firefly, it's interesting since you mentioned that you're not an engineer. What's it like for you being at Firefly not being an engineer, being in such a technically challenging business?
Well, you pick things up pretty quickly. My task is obviously not to design rocket engines. My task is to provide money so that we can pay people to design rocket engines and buy software and machinery to help us do that. But obviously I have a keen interest in the technology and in the engineering, and I enjoy spending time with our engineers. And our engineers run from chief engineers who've done this for decades all the way to very young folks who we hire right out of master's programs, and sitting down with them and having them explain to me what it is they're working on is something I enjoy greatly. But again, my role is to sit in front of investors and explain to them what it is we're doing, and that's first and foremost a business case, and then explaining to them why it's technically feasible for us to do what it is we're doing with a certain amount of money and a budget. And I think in that regard, my business background, my finance background is actually quite critical, because you have to speak to these people in the language that they understand.
Right, and I'll get you in 1 second, because I just want to ask Natalya something, because someone asked Joe a question earlier, what good is a business plan written by an engineer? And I kind of looked at you and laughed, right? So, because you're an engineer and you wrote your business plan, right? So what kind of challenges or not did you find as an engineer writing your business plan?
Google is full of resources on how to write a business plan. I think someone gave me really great advice when I was out preparing to raise our A round, and they said, this is maybe more around fundraising, but I think you're basically presenting a business plan and then asking for money. But they said the 4 most important points to hit on are opportunity, context, team, and deal. And I think no one really writes like a 20-page business plan anymore, but anytime you're trying to tell that story, I think if you have those four aspects in there, so opportunity being like, why now? What's the market climate? What's going on? Why is the timing right? Context, what are you doing? How does it fit into the landscape today? How is it better? Team, for an early team with no business backgrounds and no real credentials other than engineering degrees. That for us was just demonstrating that we didn't meet the night before at like a founders dating event, and that we weren't going to hate each other tomorrow. So it was my co-founder and I met in lab in 2010. So there was some history there. And then deal, obviously you have to think about the financial side of things. So I really think a business plan should be able to be boiled down to those 4 points, and you can explain it in probably 4 slides, and that's how I think about it.
Great. Question?
We've seen Exos Aerospace come out of the ashes of Armadillo Aerospace, and you mentioned Falcon 1. What's the relationship with SpaceX? Is it a carbon copy of Falcon 1? And also the second question is, where do you fit in the market compared to Exos?
I'm not even sure I can really understand the second question. Let me answer the first one first. It's definitely not a carbon copy of Falcon 1. For starters, 12 years have gone by, and there's just been tremendous innovation in material science, in electronics. A lot of things that we're doing on the avionics front at Firefly have really only been enabled through the smartphone revolution that's taken place in the last 10 years. So when Elon and his team were designing Falcon 1, they were working with what was available and cutting edge at that point in time, but do not underestimate what's happened in the last decade plus. But Elon left that market behind because he wants to go to Mars, and building small rockets doesn't get you there. You got to build BFRs, as he calls them. So there is a really strong need, both in the commercial market and maybe even more so in the national security market. for a sub-1 metric ton vehicle or class of vehicles, and that's a business opportunity that we saw. Now, I'll say, I don't have personally contact with Elon anymore today, but we were in touch after PayPal in the early days of SpaceX. Tom Markusik, my partner and CEO, who was a very early and very senior engineer director over at SpaceX, still has a line of communication with Elon. We talk to SpaceX at very senior level all the time. We've got a great relationship with them. They've certainly helped us out here and there when we've needed things that were difficult for us to procure. And so we cherish that relationship. And, I'll also say about SpaceX, I think, we've hired a lot of people who at one point in their careers were at SpaceX. Elon, by the way, doesn't like that so much, but that's a different issue. We're in awe of what that company achieves. If it wasn't for SpaceX, a company like Firefly couldn't exist today. And we definitely recognize that, and we cheer them on, as much as we can, and think that what they're doing is just absolutely awesome.
Question.
I have a question for Michael. This is a story that the space press has largely ignored, but you guys have been sued by Virgin Galactic, and can you comment on that and kind of give background and tell us where that is right now?
So you're throwing him the softball question, right? Yeah.
I was just going to say that Doug gets up here every panel and just throws the softballs out. So first of all, I'd like to clarify that actually Firefly has not been sued by Virgin Galactic.
Right.
Actually, Tom has. Tom is the former vice president of Propulsion at Virgin Galactic, and this is a matter between a former employee and a former employer, but of course it affects Firefly. I guess my comment is, if you can't beat them, sue them. It seems to be a strategy that they've come up with. Our view is that the matter is completely frivolous. There's not a shred of evidence that Tom has done anything that he's been accused of. And I think one way that has manifested itself in the market is, at Firefly we've raised pretty much a little bit over $70 million at this point in time. A lot of that from big institutional investors, and these are not people who write checks to finance lawsuits. So we've been through a good amount of scrutiny by independent outside parties. We ourselves have hired independent auditors to review our technology and engineering. That's always come back clean. The investors were satisfied that there isn't really any risk to our business and to the technology that we're using. So that matter is going to have to play its course.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so why don't we shift gears a little bit since you brought up funding. That's always a question that audience always have about fundraising and funding, and from the entrepreneur perspective, what are the opportunities and challenges of raising money today? I mentioned earlier that we've got a kind of a diverse representation of viewpoints, so to the extent that you're comfortable saying out loud, although you already did for you, but just go down the line, if you guys can tell a little bit about how much money you've raised to date, and actually let's just start with what you've raised to date, and then we'll get into a discussion about it in a minute. So.
Yeah, so, I'll say, first of all, by the way, before I say that, it's extremely, extremely hard to raise money for these kinds of businesses, okay? Let's not kid ourselves. People who tell you otherwise, I don't think they've sat in front of too many investors. So we're very fortunate over, the last 2 years have done a number of rounds, starting with multimillionaires and slowly increasing to more and more institutional capital. And, it's maybe close to the just over $70 million threshold. If you take everything into account, you also have to raise money, at least in our case. That's not just equity. That's equity, that's debt, that's grants that we get from different governments for different things, economic development grants, technology development grants, etc.
Accion raised a $2 million seed round in 2014, and we decided to do that as a priced round versus convertible notes or other methods. We have a $6.5 million DoD grant, and then we just had our second close for our A round, which will end up being around $9 million.
RBC Signals, I funded it personally for the first 7 months that we operated, and then we were fortunate to find a lead investor in Entrepreneurial Ventures as a super angel, I guess, and some other smaller angel investors, and we've raised just under $300,000.
And maybe Natalya, what have been some of the challenges or not challenges in your case, in some cases, of raising the money that you were able to raise?
For me and for Accion, I think the biggest hurdle we had to overcome was the market. I hate kind of spinning it this way, but at the end of the day, we're a component propulsion system, and that takes the potential upside of this growing market and really just looks at a small chunk of it. So I knew that would be a challenge going into it. So going into trying to raise an A round. So for a month leading up to my planned, I guess, road show or whatever, I went and talked with every aerospace executive and investor that knows the space, and really tried to get buy-in on the numbers that I was going to then go out and claim where the industry was headed in our addressable market. And I basically ended up with projections, like some of you in this room even helped with that, ended up with projections that everyone I spoke to agreed with, and so I could go out and pitch to those numbers and say, like, everyone, I got buy-in from everyone, and so I made it kind of hard to argue with my market numbers. So I just knew it would be a challenge and decided to put in a lot of legwork before going out and even trying.
Christopher, how about you?
So which part would you want me to talk to? Because it's a bit smaller of a story.
Yeah. Well, what's worked and what hasn't worked? What are you finding most challenging? Because your RBC's at the earlier stage of the spectrum, so you're dealing with angels and smaller seed funds. What are you finding the biggest hurdles to overcome?
So I think the biggest hurdles to overcome right now are just the trying to bridge the gap between the educational components that are required. Some people really understand the industry, and it doesn't really take a lot for them to know what the opportunity is. Sometimes it's difficult to be able to communicate what the value proposition that we're offering is, because a lot of times the companies themselves that will be our customers aren't really aware of the problem that they have in communications until much later in the process. And so being able to clearly articulate the value proposition, being able to describe the size of the market, and being able to demonstrate that we have a business model that is sustainable, all of those things, I think those are all the challenges that would be faced by any entrepreneur. What we've heard many times is that as I think you would also agree, as a component person, we're a service provider, and so for us, a lot of investors see an investment in us as kind of an if squared type of problem, where we can only be successful if our customers are successful, and a lot of investors really shy away from those types of investments. So being able to convince them that our customers' money is good, and when they say they're going to work with us, that they're going to be there in 5 years, that's not always a slam dunk. And so even if we get LOIs, or even if we get long-term commitments signed, sometimes those have a heavy discount applied to them, which make it a challenge both in terms of equity financing and debt financing.
Okay, thanks. Bruce.
Yeah, so and you guys have kind of addressed this, Natalie Natalya kind of addressed this, but one of the things that, and having done this for a long time on various aspects of the space business, one of the challenges has always been, how do you predict an emerging market? How do you get the confidence on the part, especially the folks that have the money? Now, obviously, it's much better now than it was before, but still, how are you making the case? So doing your homework is fine, but especially when you're trying to extrapolate into the future, convincing them that this is something that's got legs and this isn't just another bubble or just something, the next iridium where you put in a lot of money and then it craters. Any thoughts about good ways to do that?
I'm going to actually ask you if you would do something, because until I talked with you and PJ, I didn't actually know the story of the founding of Firefly. So maybe if you could kind of talk through what was the interaction between you, PJ, and Thomas. How did you decide that there was market opportunity and it was worth going after?
Yeah, Tom had been involved in launching Falcon 1s down in Kwajalein, and then subsequently became test director for the for Falcon 9 first stage. But I had firsthand experience with that small satellite launch vehicle. PJ's background is actually academically in astronautics, but then he became a software entrepreneur. And I look at it purely from the finance and business opportunity side. So, when we got together, we very quickly honed in on this Falcon 1 market. I never believed the story that SpaceX spun, that they moved away from the Falcon 1 because there wasn't enough of a market opportunity there. Knowing Elon's management style, it was a distraction, and he's pretty laser focused in what it is he does, and he needed to get Falcon 9 up and running fast and reliably. So Falcon 1 and running a separate production line was really just a distraction to that. We ended up spending over 3 months really just going to interview prospective customers and try to understand what payloads they had. We didn't care so much, obviously, about the application, but really where they needed to go, what weight class they were looking at, what kind of power requirements they were looking at, et cetera. And we spoke to the end customers. Some of the companies that have been mentioned a lot here out of Silicon Valley, but we also went to speak extensively to satellite contract manufacturers who really have a lot of insight into this. And so we did a lot of market research, and that is what it comes down to. I think you have to be able to articulate how you've talked to the customer. Now, the much more difficult customer to talk to is that national security customer. Even leaving that aside, we've done extensive work, and there's a lot of data that's obviously available. I mean, we've done a tremendous amount of work on historically evaluating all of the payloads that exist, which of those are within our addressable market, not just from a weight perspective, but let's assume for a second that Firefly is never going to get commercial small satellite launch out of China or out of Russia or out of Iran. Sorting all that out, showing for the last 5 years what kind of growth rates exist, extrapolating from that, if those growth rates just continue, let's assume that there's no stimulus effect that a small satellite launch vehicle actually has on the market. Where does this go? And actually the data that we found, and we're becoming increasingly more confident in, is that if all 3 of the big small satellite launch providers out there, Virgin Galactic, Rocket Labs, and Firefly, become operational, and all 3 of us on a relatively aggressive scale max out our production capacity, there's no way that we're going to be able to satisfy the demand that we see in the market. So, it takes a lot of minute work of interviewing customers, of looking and understanding the data, building it out in a model. But with that, you can convince, I think, even the harshest critics that there's actually something there.
So when you were just saying that you're not going to be able to satisfy market demand, are you actually encouraging people to go out and start launch companies?
The hardest thing you're ever going to do in your life. My hat goes off to you if you want to do it. I got to tell you, just to expand on that a little, I'm not kidding you. Most of the gray hair you see has been the last 2 years. It's not the scaling or anything, and it's convincing, at the end of the day, investors, and we always start every investor meeting with the fact that we want to make money. And guess what? In our industry, there's very few people that have ever made money. And convincing them of that, putting together the financial team, putting together the engineering team until you get critical mass. I've never worked harder in my life. It really, truly is challenging. And I'm not even going to get into the actual engineering challenges to meet performance criteria. That's a whole other problem that other people at our company have to worry about. So being an entrepreneur is hard. It's often very, very lonely. Being an entrepreneur in aerospace is exponentially harder, I think. And I'm sure your guys' experience is not much different there.
Yes.
Well, you can jump in if you want. Preach.
And the people problem. So there's the financial and market and convincing people. There's the technical challenges, and then people have emotions, and it gets all really messy and. But on the market, mechanically, how I walked through it. Ultimately, our customers are satellite manufacturers or anyone that's integrating and buying components. So I needed to put a number to that. And so, like Joe's slide, there are 160 companies that have raised money, so there's no reason not to do a bottoms-up analysis of the market. So I looked at every company that exists today that could be our potential customer and broke them into various buckets that make sense as far as how much they spend on their satellites and so on, how heavy they are. And then I said there are, this many companies today. How many do I think there will be in 2025? And I think that's the biggest variable for my calculations, not how much will they spend on propulsion. It's how many of them will still be around. So I took today's number of companies, that market size, and I said, let's assume like some worst case scenario for in 10 years from now, how many are still around, and that's kind of just how I bracketed my market. I didn't, I should have probably said, well, how many satellites does it take to turn the sky black? That's my market. But I think like maybe to a fault conservative engineer by training, not trained as like a salesperson. So that's how I came up with the number.
I'll say that for me as an engineer as well, it can be sometimes difficult to put together a business plan because the engineer in me says that I'm not being paid to make guesses, I need to provide facts. I was able to overcome that somewhat when I was at Bain & Company because we make all of our money by pulling guesses out of thin air, and our defense being that nobody in the world knows it better than we do. And so there has to be an element of that you have to be confident in the guesses that you're making because nobody knows the right answer. The only thing you know for sure is that you're wrong. What you don't know is how far or by how much you're wrong. And so as an engineer, you have to be able to get over that uncomfortable feeling of being uncertain with the projections that you're making if you want to be an entrepreneur and not just be locked in that analysis paralysis loop.
One more thing. One thing that helped Accion raise was that our kind of worst case scenario, let's say the market is really slow to keep growing as everyone projects, or it just never does. Our worst case scenario, like barring the technology not working or like me going crazy, our worst case is we sell to the stable government military segment that are already our early customers and make up most of our initial pipeline, and we are a small, profitable business. Investors don't really want to hear that as the goal, but that's the backup plan. Whereas I think, like what Christopher was saying, a lot of companies emerging in this space have the, risk squared because their success depends on this, exponential growth of the industry. So I think if you can remove some of that, which is just kind of an inherent trait to the business you're pursuing, not really an option that you can choose to elect, but it helped Accion a lot.
Bruce, it was interesting you said that you've been doing this a number of years, and it was your question kind of triggered something in my head, which is, I've been going to NewSpace conferences for a long time, and I've seen a lot of these panels and entrepreneurs up here. One trend that I've noticed, I guess I'm just going to throw in a little bit of my own personal observation. One trend that I've noticed over the last 5 years, especially over the last 3 years, is that's an actual critical question that everyone's trying to answer, right? How do you figure out your market? Or, as Michael was saying, actually convincing investors that your goal is to make money. For many, many years, everyone starting space companies was more of a space enthusiast, I think. Was really excited about space and really thought everyone else would think it was cool. And why aren't investors giving me a ton of money? Well, it's because the entrepreneurs hadn't thought of the questions that all these guys are thinking about now. And investors weren't convinced, as Michael was saying, that the entrepreneur's goal was actually to make money, which is what the investors are really concerned with. So.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that it looks like we have two businesses here that do the flight hardware, things that actually go up, probably maybe the more glamorous, and another one doing infrastructure. And that's kind of where my design comes in, is because I'm thinking not every company is going to want to go out and buy their own or build their own sea-based launch and landing platform, but they might want to use one. So, I see it as infrastructure, but like you're saying, it's probably more difficult to get the investors behind that because it's a sub-level, you depend on the next layer of success, as you're saying. So, but it seems like there should be a big opportunity in infrastructure just as well supporting all the flight hardware.
Go ahead.
So one of the things that I think is critical critical if you want to serve the space market is figure out a way to generate revenue along the way. And if you can find a terrestrial market for that infrastructure, all the better. And I think that's absolutely critical for us. We don't necessarily need to find a terrestrial market because there are satellites that are flying today that still need to bring data down, and so there is an existing customer base that we can serve today. But I think that's the key to any of these businesses, is making sure that you have some path that doesn't require multiple decades and multiple billions of dollars before you receive first revenue.
All right, yeah, sounds good.
When I asked earlier how many people wanted to potentially are currently running their own companies, and then some that wanted to join companies, one of the reasons I asked is, as Michael just said, being an entrepreneur, especially a founder CEO, especially founder CEO in a space company, is very, very tough. And it's a lot of times a very lonely job. And so the initial founding team tends to be very important. And you were talking a little bit earlier about Firefly's founding team. So I thought maybe Natalya and Christopher, if you could talk a little bit about your founding team, and especially Natalya, the lessons learned from your first startup and how you applied them, bringing your founding team for Accion together.
Well, Guillermo, I made the same mistakes the second time with the second company as well. The first time my team was cobbled together by my advisor while I was doing my master's, and we formed the company and just divided equity like 1/n for the number of founders. We didn't really talk about like commitment or roles or expectations, and then surprisingly we fell apart like shortly thereafter. So I was like, wow, I really learned like 5 founders is a lot. Like you probably shouldn't, just go into that without having at least a very good reason for why you need all of you. And then I went and did that exact same thing again. My research advisor then at MIT was like, here are 5 people that I've also cobbled together that should be the founding team. And I was like, this sounds like a terrible idea. But we did it anyways. And now we're only 2 founders out of the 5. So it was, we actually learned, I did learn to like have those difficult conversations the second time around. So as most engineers would approach the founder equity, splitting up the pie discussion, we had an Excel sheet with weighted stages for the various level or various stages of the company. If you make it, to here, we think this phase is most important, so we'll, attribute the most to equity here and so on. So we ended up with this really complicated spreadsheet. But it was, we actually had to have the hard conversations around like commitment levels and how much time people would put into this and what happens, are you going to drop out of your PhD if we need you to? Well, no, then we're going to, buy back some of your equity. And we basically just agreed that we had to view the arrangement as a dynamic, ever-changing agreement, and we bought back equity along the way. We fired people, founders, and I think going into it just knowing that you can like take your, make your best guess at how things will turn out, but just knowing that you're going to have to edit that spreadsheet going forward.
So this was something that I thought I was going to be great at because I had studied all of what the internet had to say about how to allocate equity amongst founders, and we also had kind of a rough go of it. We started with 3, we're now 2. And that wasn't necessarily a smooth transition. We avoided some of the pitfalls, or at least I thought I had, and in reality I hadn't. I thought we could, one thing you know at the beginning of a company, especially at the very, very early stages, is that you don't know exactly what the company is going to need, what talents are going to be needed, what skills are going to be needed. Even the strategy of the company in an early stage, it's very dynamic, and so things can pivot quickly. And so I wanted to have a system where depending on, as different founders were able to contribute, that they would be able to receive equity based on the value of their contribution to the company. And it wasn't always clear exactly what contribution was needed and how that would work out. And so it led to the longer you go to have the actual, okay, what is the split going to be conversation, the harder it gets. And so it's a tough, there's a tension there, because if you do it too early, you could have a team that isn't right for what the company actually needs, and then it can be very difficult to restructure that. If you wait too long, there can be a lot of uncomfortable and feelings, and it could be a challenge. I think we've successfully come out of that stage. I feel like we have good relationships with everybody, but there were some uncomfortable moments in the middle.
So semi-related to that, I'm going to ask you a question before you answer it. I'm going to actually give a little story with it too. But what I'm going to ask you is, within the founding team, sometimes it's difficult to figure out who's going to be the CEO. In some cases, it may be easy. In some cases, it gets harder. So go thinking about that for a second for your individual companies. But it's funny because so many people, entrepreneurship tends to be so glamorized. And those of us who have done it or are doing it, you know, as Michael was saying, it's just a very, very difficult thing to do. And so a few years ago, I don't know how many of you know Tom Barton. He's currently the CEO of Planet. He's a serial entrepreneur, serial CEO, COO. And a few years ago, he and 4 buddies, I think he'd be okay with me telling the story. So he and 4 buddies, also very all-star CEOs, entrepreneurs, venture-backed, successful exits, got together and they figured we're going to do this backwards. We're going to create the rockstar all-star team first, the founding team first, and then we're going to go find a business opportunity, and investors will be just throwing money at us, and we're going to be a huge success. So we got 5 of them together. Each of them had been founder CEO, but they came at it from different paths. Tom's background is more in sales. There was one who was an engineer. There was one who was a CFO. They all had been in the CEO seat, but from different paths. So they all got together. They were going to form this powerhouse founding team. And I asked them, with all those powerful, experienced CEOs, how did you decide who was going to be CEO? And they started laughing. There's 2 of my friends who were 2 of the 5. And they both started laughing. And they said, actually, none of us wanted the job. None of us. We literally drew straws, and the short straw, which was Tom, ended up being CEO. It was just a thankless job, and nobody wanted it, which is weird because going in, everyone wants it. I don't know, maybe it was easy for you guys, right?
In my case, it was pretty easy. In both of my ventures, both at Hedge and at Firefly, it was pretty obvious who the CEO was going to be. So, yeah. Look, I think that in my personal view as a CFO, again, having to sit in front of investors, is that I do think that the CEO needs to be the person who's the most competent to actually make the product or service happen. Right now, there are additional qualities that are of significant importance. And actually, specifically, a story I like telling about Tom Markusik, CEO of Firefly, is the reason I became a co-founder is he came to me and he said, Michael, I know I can design this rocket. I know I can build the team. I also know that I don't know anywhere near enough about building a business and finance and how to approach investors. And for that reason, I want to offer you and PJ to become co-founders. And I thought, first-time engineer CEO who's willing to admit what he doesn't know. That's actually a great start. Mm-hmm. The CEO who says that he or she knows everything is probably going to be a pretty useless CEO. Right. So.
And Christopher, for you, I know your co-founder is an experienced CEO. And how have those discussions, or how did those discussions kind of play out?
So when I was thinking about, I was talking with my co-founders and we were thinking about how we would start the business and evaluating whether there was a market there and whether we wanted to dive in, at that time it wasn't clear to me that I was the right person to be the CEO. Despite the fact that I'd been preparing myself specifically for that role for the last 17 years, I felt like I wasn't ready. And as we looked and as we talked about it, at that point it became clear that even if I wasn't ready, that I would get ready through the process of doing it, and that I was the person that was probably best suited of the 3 of us to actually to help grow the company. But the fact that I do have experienced leadership on that founding team. Has been a great blessing for us, and we've leveraged that to great success.
And Natalya, you've got your own interesting story on this one.
Yeah, I didn't start out as a CEO. Someone else did of Accion, one of the 5 founders that's not with us anymore. And the shift sort of happened organically. We thought originally that all 5 of us needed to go to every meeting together and make every decision together, and that's not very efficient. So soon we stopped doing that, but everyone was sending me to every meeting and letting me make decisions, and for the whole group, and just slowly it became more clear. I think we reincorporated to change our name from kind of a placeholder, and that was the point where we were like, does this make sense how it was before, or should we switch? And so we switched.
So it's like you're all in line. Whoever wants to be CEOs take a step forward, and your co-founders take a step back.
Yeah, apparently, yeah.
All right, so we've been talking a little bit more internally focused, maybe shifting gears back to externally focused, and kind of going back to Bruce's question about market and getting to the market, the big C word, customers. At a startup, it's really difficult trying to get customers. It's kind of a chicken and egg thing, right? It's like you need the customers to get validation on your ideas and to bring in revenue. On the other hand, you need the product. How do you balance all of that, and how do you go out and get your first customers? Any one of you, because I know you've all been in that same situation.
Well, I think it's hard from a customer's perspective to buy a drawing on a piece of paper. That's a couple years out from being real. So I think you have to, as an entrepreneur, be realistic about what you can expect from your customers. I will tell you, in the small satellite launch vehicle space, it's fascinating because nobody wants to buy anything because they kind of need to get convinced that you're real. And so they wait, and then all of a sudden the market figures out you're real, and now all of a sudden you're sold out. And there aren't that many launch service providers out there. So I think as tricky as it is for a company to figure out how to sell, it's in our space equally tricky for a customer of ours to figure out when to buy. While I would have liked to have had more customers early on, now I'm kind of juggling, like, well, I really like you, but I'm not sure where I can slot you in. I mean, I have a manifest, and there's only so many vehicles that I can build. So it's sort of it's like being in the consulting business, right? Forever you're going to have a drought, and then all of a sudden it starts raining, and you don't know what to do with all the business that you have. So it's pretty interesting in our case.
So I'm like kind of internally fumbling with the, when's it the right time to go out and actually start taking people's money. And so for now, we've been really just product development and engineering focused. And we have 3 customers within that kind of stable initial segment. I mentioned, government, military. And I was actually talking with Pete Beck from Rocket Lab about this, and I'm like, how did you know you could start taking deposits? Like, when did you get to that point when you felt comfortable doing that, when you're still doing development? A lot of stuff is still just on paper, and he just said when people are ready to give it to you. And so, that I'm keeping that in mind, but really still focusing on finishing up product development. I think we're kind of in a unique position where everybody's ready. People are trying to buy systems, and we have like a great reputation so far because we haven't done anything to mess it up, and I don't want to start taking money and then slipping on deliveries and so on. So I'm, focusing on product development for now.
For us, there's a tension because we have several segments of customers. We have these existing operators that are in space today that already have a core of infrastructure that they're using for their everyday operations. And then we've got these new customers that we're trying to capture that want to be able to have their spacecraft launched in 6, 12, 18, 24 months from now. And because we provide communication infrastructure as a service, the money doesn't actually start flowing from those deals until they've launched and are in orbit. And so it's important for us to fill the pipeline with those people because they need to be able to have an idea of what their concept of operations is going to be and what ground stations they're going to use while they're designing their systems and before they build it. So for me, I need to have a credible offering very early in the process, well before it's going to be used, and I need to be able to fill a pipeline many months or years before it's going to be used. And so for me, it's a challenge because a lot of these customers that are coming are dealing with funding challenges themselves. They can't really pay deposits. They can't, they're trying to do a technical study. They want to know what we can do, and they want to have as much assurance that we're going to be there when they need us as possible. And so that was the real reason that I built the company in a way that could provide services very quickly. So rather than going out and building a bunch of infrastructure and raising tens of millions of dollars, we aggregate the excess capacity of existing infrastructure. And so we put together a service very quickly within the first 8 months of incorporating. We had a service that could be sold. We could provide revenue generating activities to customers. And then now we're looking for a mix of those small revenues that come from incremental downloads from people on orbit today, mixed with gap to when the new customers will start coming online. So it's not necessarily a challenge right now of people. There are plenty of people that are interested in talking. It's just that the way that the business works is that the cash isn't going to flow for a while. So that's our bigger problem. Okay, total aside, but on that last question, you both raised your microphones at the same time, and I could have sworn you were going to start singing at the same time. But anyway, so going back to talk about being CEO, being a founder is lonely and it's very difficult. And a lot of it is because in the early stages you have to wear so many different hats. You have to do so many different things. But since we're talking about customers, one of the big things you've got to do is you got to sell. You're always selling. You're selling to yourself, to your team, to the media, to investors, and to customers. Each of the three of you has different personalities. You've got different backgrounds. I don't know Tom, but I know PJ helps out with going to talk to customers. How have you dealt with having to get out and talk with customers? If you're an engineer or if you're an introvert, if you're not like a career salesperson who's used to doing that kind of thing. And I don't know if anyone of you want to jump into that one. I can start with that. Yeah. One of the critical tasks for a CEO of any company is to put the right team around them. And I love to talk to people about selling, but I'm one person. And so having a great salesperson on my team has been a huge benefit. So with our founding team and with the team that we've put together, we can walk into just about any existing spacecraft operator and have multi-year, sometimes multi-decade relationships with that team, with that customer because of the people that I've got on my team. So I think picking the right people is important. And then for me, it's also about just learning to be comfortable with it. The fact that I'm very passionate about it, the fact that the story that we're telling and the goal that we're trying to achieve, I mean, we're part of this infrastructure that is making people's lives on Earth and off of Earth in the future at some point better through the application of space data. And so having that passion in your heart as you go out and talk to customers makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, I'll say that in my experience, not just in the aerospace industry, but in general, finding really great salespeople is actually very, very difficult. I found that solving the problem of good sales by throwing money at it is one of the worst things that you can do. You're going to attract the wrong type of person. In our industry, I totally agree with what you just said. Having folks that have deep-rooted connections and experience in the industry and into the customer base can be very valuable. It's kind of also an endorsement of you and your engineering team if you have that right salesperson who has those experiences, because they're careful at evaluating who they choose as their next employer as well. We've at Firefly, we've had a sales rep in Europe for quite a long time, actually, just somebody we knew and somebody who has probably 25 plus year experience in the European satellite industry. And I think that Firefly is better known in Europe as a result of the work that that gentleman's been doing there than we probably even are here in the United States, even though we're obviously 100% based here. So.
Okay, so we're coming to the end, so I'm going to ask each of you to close up with, and while you're thinking about this, I'm going to answer it myself too, to close with one bit of good advice that you've been given in your career that you use every day. And for me, it came from actually from John Higginbotham, who at the time was running SpaceVest, the only venture capital fund focused exclusively on space companies. And his bit of advice to me was always have at least 1 to 3 mentors. Being a founder CEO is extremely difficult. It's lonely. You need somebody to talk with who's sat in your seat before. So always have at least 1 to 3 mentors. Michael.
Yeah, the best advice that I got was general career advice very early on by a mentor of mine in Silicon Valley. He'd been one of the founders of Silicon Valley, and he said, really what you need to do is you need to think about the organization that you're part of or that you want to join, and does the product or the output of that organization have an input on society as a whole? And then the next question is the position that you have within that organization. Are you going to be in a position to influence the direction of the organization? And then the next question after that is, are the people that you're going to work with potentially going to be close friends of yours? Because you're going to be spending so much of your time with it. And at the very bottom of the list is, and then, maybe you want to be compensated for that as well. But the point is, if you can check all these other boxes, the organization and you and your team are going to be successful, and with that will come a financial reward. So I got that advice. I was probably about 23 or 24. I didn't really understand it at the time, but over the years, it's been really the most valuable piece of advice that I received.
Natalya?
From one of my mentors, so kind of related to what Guillermo said, very early on, he just told me about his kind of practice of, if you're fortunate enough to meet, really wonderful people, and you'll be exposed to a lot of them in this kind of role, like just try really hard not to waste people's time, and get a lot out of each conversation, do a little bit of homework when you're meeting really cool people, and come prepared to sort of give a little bit in all of those interactions. And I think one of the things I've been great at doing at Accion is kind of surrounding us with this team of superstar advisors and mentors. And I think part of the reason these folks are willing to give their time is because I've been very deliberate about not wasting any of it. And I take a lot of meetings that end up being kind of silly, and I want to just tell these people, like, a few well thought out questions would have been really nice or something, so I think that was some good advice.
And Christopher?
So for me, very early in my career, in fact, my first manager when I started at Sea Launch, his name was Rod Saylor. He's at Blue Origin today, and he's mentored many, many people over his career. But he taught me this concept of always having a target architecture. And what that means is it's having a long-term plan. Very rarely in business do you have all of the resources you need to achieve your goals and your dreams immediately. But if you have a long-term vision, then you can make sure that every even small incremental step that you make along the way is heading in that direction. And that, while it was in a technical context when he taught it to me, has been some of the most valuable advice I've ever received, because it's been applicable everywhere, from the career choices that I made, being very focused on this goal of running a multinational space company, to the investment choices that I make with my time, to how we use our resources at a startup. That has influenced so much of what I've done. It's been great.
Great. So we'll close with that. I want to thank Christopher, Natalya, and Michael, and thank all of you. Enjoy the rest of today. And Andrew, there we are. Thank you.
Fantastic. So over the last couple of days in the lobby, there has been a gold skull